Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. If this is your first time attending, my name is Garrett. I am a commercial director and producer and the host of this series that Light Panels is putting on called Professional Lighting Techniques. If you have not seen previous episodes in this series, those are online. You can find those on Light Panels' website as well as on their YouTube channel, which I do highly recommend that you subscribe to, because as we continue to do these, if your schedule conflicts and things, you can still pick up on episodes that you may have previously missed. In the chat, you'll see there's a link to the Light Panels webpage that you'll be able to see that there. Today, we are talking about commercial lighting. We're going to be looking at two examples of commercials that we have done. One is a spec project and the other is a project we did for a client, all utilizing the Gemini products. So I'm glad that you're here. If you want to toss into the chat where you are viewing from, I love to see where everybody is coming from. Today, we have a lot of content to go over. We're going to be going over a lot more quickly than we normally do, just because of the scope and size of the projects that we're going to be looking at today. That said, as always, if you have any questions, comments, things that you want a little clarity on, there's the chat, and then also there is the Q&A module. If you want to toss your questions into either the chat or the Q&A, I will do my best as we move through this to answer questions as they come up. And then at the end, if there's time, we will also open it up for Q&A for any questions that you might have about these projects. So before we dive in, I also want to give you a little sneak peek on what next month's live stream is going to be on. It's one of my favorites that we've done so far. And again, you can go to Light Panels webpage and register for that. We are doing 3 looks, 1 location. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a single scene in a single location, and we're going to be lighting it 3 completely different ways to give 3 completely different looks. This is the thing that we can use as filmmakers if we're trying to change genres, right? We don't film a thriller in the same way that we film a rom-com. We don't film a drama in the same way that we film a comedy. And lighting is such a big component of how our projects tonally feel. So again, next month, 3 looks, 1 location. I'm very excited about that. Again, you can register for that. It's free as always, but register for that via the link there. I see people from California, from London, from Dallas, from Houston, from Poland, Puerto Rico. It is from La La Land, perfect, Brazil. It's good to see all you guys. Thank you so much for being a part of this. So last month, if you guys were on the live stream or you guys caught up on YouTube, we looked at how to shoot for natural light. We talked about how shooting natural light is very different than shooting available light, and how we make people look and feel in an outdoor setting is very different than how people actually look in those settings. Again, if you missed that one, there's links in the chat here that you'll then be able to go back and look at that should you want to. The example that we used in that one was a commercial project that we shot, which kind of ties into the things that we are going to be looking at today. So today, we're looking at 2 projects. The first project is going to be a spec ad for a fashion brand. This is where we're going to be using a model in multiple locations, and then how do you light for multiple locations that all still tie into each other, but all have unique and distinct looks. And then the second is a commercial project that we worked with Adidas on a product, in this case, a shoe, and how different product lighting is from model lighting when it comes to commercial work. So we're going to be looking at 2 examples that are wildly different. Again, if you have questions, pop them in the chat, pop them in that Q&A, and we will kind of move through this fairly quickly here. So before we can break down a project, we should probably look at it first. So here is the first commercial project that we're going to be looking at.
Hey, you know I want it. Hey.
Now, Zoom does this wonderful thing where it compresses the video to make it look super crunchy and things, and so obviously I'm assuming that what you guys were looking at, of course, was a little bit over-contrasted, a little dark and that kind of stuff. I don't know if Eric's in the Zoom today, but as always, I'll be posting this along with some BTS stuff on my Instagram, so you can actually see what it's really supposed to look like. You can see the real colors and all of that kind of thing. You can follow me on Instagram. It's just my name. It's at Garrett Sammons. Also, if you have any questions or projects or things that you want to talk about, that's where I'm most active online, so feel free to DM me, chat with me there. But you'll be able to see really kind of what that looks like in the color-corrected version of that there. But for the purposes of today, what we're breaking down is we're going to be breaking down these 5 locations. Okay, so there are 5 locations that we did for this spot, 5 different outfits that we used the model for with different accessories and different fashion kind of styling. A good friend of mine was the model for this, and he provided all of his own wardrobe. He's one of the most stylish people that I have ever known in my life. But what we're going to do is we're going to break down each of these locations by setup. We're going to talk about the fixtures that we used, why we used them, where we placed them to get the looks that we wanted to get. So the first one that we're going to be looking at today is this boiler room, kind of industrial room setup. And for this one, we set up 4 different lights. Our main light, which you can see there, is a 2x1 Gemini in an octo box. On the opposite end, we have a 1x1 Gemini low, 1 high, one's blue, one is white. You can see the low there, the high there, and that's giving us that really harsh background lighting where this octo box in the front is giving us a really nice soft wash through it. The nice thing is all of the Gemini lights, of course, can be powered by battery, which you can see there, which allows us to get 100% power out of our fixtures if we don't have access to mains. So you can see just how different the lighting is from behind to in front, and we can kind of break that down into the behavior of light, which is something that we talk a lot about in this series. One of the things that we really need to work on as filmmakers, cinematographers, gaffing, depending on kind of where you want, is controlling not only the intensity of a light, but the behavior of that light. So sometimes we need the light to be hard, sometimes we need the light to be soft, and that has nothing to do with the intensity of the light. So whether you're using a 1x1 hard like what we have here, or a 1x1 soft, a 2x1 soft, 2x1 hard, whatever, you can actually adjust the behavior of that light in addition to that intensity. So real quick here, to give you kind of a visual breakdown of how this all worked. We had this kind of little L-shaped hallway that we were working with here, which is where most of our action happened, like this. Our talent primarily was set up here, if we're looking at this kind of from the top-down view. We had our octo box, which is a 5-foot octo box by DOP Choice here, which was our main key light. This is what gives us that really, really bright, yet really, really soft light. Kind of behind this HVAC system that's kind of living here, we have 2 1x1s. One is sitting high up here and one is sitting low down here. This high 1x1 that we have is what's giving us that really nice, sharp cut light behind our talent. That's what's giving us our crispy edges. And this low one we had set to blue with our HSI values, and that blue then is what illuminated the floor to keep the floor from kind of falling into darkness, especially behind our subject, because they are so heavily front lit. We then, to match this, also put a 2x1 Gemini on the floor down here. No modifiers on that one, and we used the same color that we had on the 1x1 with the 2x1. And this serves kind of 2 purposes. 1, it illuminates the floor, but 2, it also gives us some brightness and some color into kind of that industrial environment that's behind our subject. In the episode where we talked about how to light interviews for documentaries and corporate work, one of the things that we discussed is it's just as important to light your subject as it is to light your environment. If we light our subject but we don't have our environment lit, there's going to be no context for where our people are in place for where we're putting them. So it's not just about lighting our foreground. If that was the case, we would just use the octobox and be done with it, but we need to light the surrounding environment to give context to that. And I'll show you guys, and we can kind of break some of this down here. Pull out the iPad. And then if I switch over here, again, I know we're a little crunchy here on the, oh, Eric, welcome back. I know we're a little crunchy here on the color here for zoom, but if I pinch in here a little bit, I understand we're underexposed, but you can see here that the light that's kind of coming down and hitting from behind, in addition to kind of like hitting inside the back there, is quite hard lighting. And again, we can always tell the style of lighting or the behavior of that lighting by looking at the shadows, and all of the shadows are very defined and very crisp. In contrast to that is our light that's coming from the octobox, which is what's on camera right. And even though that light is brighter, and we can kind of see from an exposure value, right? Obviously what's happening here is brighter than what's happening here. The behavior of that light is quite different. And again, looking to the shadows, we see that we have this really soft roll-off that's happening from our octobox that we wouldn't otherwise have. I know that the face seems a little bit underexposed here. Things are falling off into black there, but what again we can see here is that behind the face we have this really hard line, hard shadow, hard contrast coming from that 1x1 that's floating up behind, and then we have this really soft light that's coming in on the face here, which is also giving us those really good catch light. You can see kind of the inverse here if we look at this. Again, we have really, really hard, really, really defined light coming from that high in the back. And then we have the really, really nice and soft fall off coming from the front. And again, the octobox is creating really, really nice catch lights in the eyes. If we go back to the wide here, you can see the way that the blue plays in is I'm getting some blue that's happening up here. I'm getting some blue hitting kind of in the back of the HVAC there. And I'm also getting blue kind of down here, which is a little hard to see on the zoom there, but all of those pockets are getting hit with that blue. And that blue, again, is to give us that contrast and to give us that context for the world that we're trying to create. If we didn't have all of that, everything would just be kind of falling into nothingness, and we wouldn't really be able to have kind of defined placement for our character. Eric, I don't know if you were here at the top, but again, like always, I know that you asked, so I just want to answer preemptively. The true color grade of this stuff is all going to go on my Instagram later today, so if you want to check that out, that'll be over there on Instagram. So, first location is this boiler room setup. We have 4 fixtures for that. Again, real quick reminder here, we have 2 2x1s. Those 2 2x1s are here and here. This one is in that 5-foot octo box. That octo box is what's giving us that really soft but intense key in our foreground. This is the lower one that's sitting kind of on the floor there. That one is giving us that same match to the blue that we're getting from this 1x1, which is also low near the floor like this, again to give us context to our background. And then we floated this one up to the ceiling. This one, again, no modifiers on that 1x1, and that's giving us that contrast across the back. It is easier and better to play with, welcome from Abu Dhabi, Omar. It's easier and better to play with mixed light behavior than it is necessarily to play with mixed light color, right? So sometimes you'll hear people working in mixed lighting environments, and that's where they're going to be lighting with daylight and with tungsten, right? Or different ranges within the CCT spectrum. That can get complicated depending on skin tone, depending on the environment, depending on bounce and a lot of things, to where you can really start to mess up skin tones with that. But when you change light behavior, right, all of that's shot with daylight. We're using a colored accent light in the background, but we can get really, really nice looking shots by having soft mixed with hard light, more so than we would with warm mixed with cool light. So let's now look at the second setup. Again, real quick reminder, any questions and things, toss them in the chat, toss them in the Q&A. I will answer them as best we can. So the next setup that we had was the blue and red mixed color light. Now this is not obviously mixed light, what we're talking about traditionally from a Kelvin table perspective. This is 2 very different colors of light, and you can see that here. So for this setup, we're in an interior location here, kind of in like an office building setup. And our key light is this 2x1 Gemini that we're floating overhead on this combo stand. And we have that in a 3-foot lantern, which you can see there. And we have the skirt over it, which is giving us a little bit of spill control there. That is our primary light source. Again, something that's battery powered, something that's easy to use. In the other room, we have a 1x1 Gemini. At 1x1 Gemini, again, we're able to play with our HSI values to get different color light in that. And that, again, is just to mix it up. It's just to give us a little splash, which you can see here, right? Our main light is this blue. We're living in this blue, but there are just these little pops of red that come in those chain links in the watch, in the background environment of the hat, right? We're not doing like a true mixed lighting setup where both colors are getting equal screen time, right? Or equal value on screen. This is intended to be a blue light setup, but we wanted to add a little bit of pop with that red that comes through, okay? For that, there's only 2 fixtures. Again, going back to this here, if we're looking at this here, we have our subject. Our subject is sitting in this chair here, right? We have this room that's over here. Directly overhead is our 3-foot octo box. That's, again, that 2x1 Gemini flown overhead with a skirt around a lantern. I'm sorry, lantern, not octo box. And that is then giving us that really soft light that's kind of moving all over our subject, but because we've then thrown a skirt around it, we're not getting that much spill, and it is a very directional source. In this room, we then have a 1x1, which we're using as kind of a bounce/book off of this wall. So we're getting a lot of radiated light coming back from this wall, in addition to some kind of cascading shadows coming from the direct light source there. So this red we've kind of sequestered into the background, and we're just using it as a little splash of fill. I didn't want it to be so much that in like the episode that we already have discussed where lighting a bar, we talked about having that equal value, the pink to blue lighting. That's not what we wanted to do here. But again, using color as a contrast tool in a way where it is a blue light. We're almost trying to make this feel somewhat monotone, but we still want it to give a little bit of draw, give a little bit of pull to it. So we add that red into it. So let's again look at this real quick here. We're going to look at a couple of examples of that here. So if I come here, you can see here that we have this really defined kind of circle here around our subject. That is the skirt from the lantern that is keeping that light really directional. And we're getting some limited spill here on these walls in the background, but not so much so that it is interfering with our lighting. Again, using it as a contrast and context tool, not so much as actually being part of the lighting source. So again, we have this really beautiful kind of top-down lighting that we're playing with here. We're getting really nice kind of shadow play here in the face, to where, again, we're getting a little bit off of the bridge of the nose, off of the shoulders and that kind of thing. But again, keeping the model somewhat obscured. And then obviously you can see here, this is where that red / kind of pink light is coming in. With the 2x1 focused primarily on this wall, it's giving us context in this room, and we're getting a little bit of direct spill kind of coming out, and you can kind of see this here, but it's not so much, again, that it is directly affecting our talent. It's being used as a background element. We come in here, you can kind of see the same thing, right? We're getting a little bit of context here with this red that's coming in and hitting the chair. We can see it a little bit in the shadow values down below, but it is really primarily not interfering with our subject. Our subject is lit in blue, and we're just getting little hints, little pops of that red color coming through. Again, like if we punch in here, really the only place that you see it is if I zoom in, you can see it here in the reflection of the links in the watch. But the rest of this, the watch face, the cuff, the collar, all of this is still living in that blue color. And then same with the hand here, right? Really good contrast. We're getting a little bit of pops here in the backs of the knuckles. But again, we really are using this as a monotone lighting style. So if you want to use monotone lighting, that's great. it is important to make sure that we're still kind of separating and kind of keeping that pop. Like here, if I, this one, there we go. You can see, obviously, background, we get all of that pink, all of that red that's back there. We get a little bit back there behind the ear. But in terms of our subject itself, the only place that we're actually getting any of that red is right here in this slight reflection in the nose there. The rest of this still is all living in that blue wash. So when you're lighting monotone, and whether you're doing it with colored light, whether you're doing it with white light, doesn't matter. The key points here is that make sure that however you end up lighting it, however you end up grading it, making sure that you again still have that separation within the depth of frame there. So first room, boiler room, 4 fixtures. Second room is this monotone lighting, that's 2 fixtures. The next one that we're going to be looking at here is an outside lighting setup. Now, these lights are not the sun. They don't replace the sun. They're not in lieu of the sun. In last month's episode where we talked about natural lighting, we showed how you can use a fixture like a 1x1 hard as a key light in certain outdoor lighting settings, but primarily these lighting fixtures, unless you're working with like giant HMI lights, are all going to be for fill. They're going to be to create a sense of consistency through your lighting, because as the sun moves throughout the day, the color and the intensity of that light shifts and changes. And if you have any sort of weather, partly cloudy to overcast, the exposure values of that light is going to change. So when we're filming outside, bringing light in to create a sense of consistency within that lighting, even if it's just as a fill, is extremely, extremely important. Which brings us up to our third piece here. We took that 5-foot octo box outside. We have our 2x1 Gemini, again battery powered, and we found a spot in the buildings outside where we are covered by shadow, so we're not directly competing with the sun. There's a great shot of that, and you can see here, this is then us using that as a fill on our subject. So then that way, again, we're not trying to create a key light, we're just creating a sense of normalcy, a sense of evenness to that lighting. And again, because we have this really nice, large surfaced area light, it keeps that light really, really soft, right? When we talk about the behavior of light, the relative surface area of your fixture in relationship to your subject directly affects the behavior of that light. The larger the surface area is relative to your subject, the softer that light will behave. The smaller the surface area is relative to your subject, the more harsh or hard that light will behave. So that light is kind of doing double duty. On the one hand, that 2x1 is blasting a ton of light out, not the sun, but it is blasting a ton of light out. And the other thing is, with that bounce or that diffusion that we have in the front of that octo box, it's also working double time because it's increasing the surface area of the fixture and also taking all of the available light that's around and acting as a bounce. So we then end up with this really nice, really even, soft lighting when we otherwise may not have it. And we're just going to look at one of these real quick here. If we come here, again, you can see here that we are in shadow, which is an important thing, right? We stayed away from direct sunlight because, again, the direct sunlight is going to be very hard. So we come into shadow, and you can see here that based on the shadow that we do have, we can tell that it is very, very soft. The other nice thing about this location that we picked is that these garage doors here are white. So it's taking all of the available light that we're throwing at it, and it is then in turn bouncing that back onto our subject. So if we zoom in here, even though in this shot it is clear that our light source is coming from this Gemini this way, right? The lighting that we get across the face is still really nice and soft, and that is due in part to the surface area of the source that we're using, which is the 2x1 in that 5-foot octo box, but also with those garage doors bringing that light back onto it. So when you guys are working on finding locations, right? Of course, we need to think about the aesthetic. We need to think about how does that look? How does that work with the brand? How does that look with the overall feel that we're going with? But in addition to that, how can we use locations to our advantage in terms of lighting, in terms of movement and blocking, and using locations to your advantage? So a great example would be in feature films. You will see a lot of light fixtures, practical lights, a lot of lamps, whether they're table lamps, whether they're floor lamps, whether they're ceiling fixtures, wall fixtures. There's an absurd amount of practical lights in locations in movies, far more so than you would have traditionally in your normal everyday life. The reason they put all of those there is it gives them an excuse within the location to create what we call motivated light. So then that gives them the freedom to light how they want, using the location to their advantage, because nobody's going to question where the lights are coming from because we've created sources within that. So in the way that they're using practicals, we are using environment, and we're using that environment as a bounce to create some of that fill. So for that, we can get really nice, really soft lighting in an outdoor environment with only needing one fixture. And in this case, of course, that is that 2x1 Gemini in that Octobox. Okay, so we've gone from 4 fixtures to 2 fixtures to 1 fixture, right? Kind of cascading our way down. But we're still able to get the looks that we want and get a variety of looks, knowing that, of course, we only need the fixtures that we need for any given location. So that goes into larger conversation. If you've been a part of this and hung out with us, we talk often about buying the brightest, most accurate light your budget can afford, because that allows you to modify it however you want to modify it. And that's a great example of why we buy bright lights. Speaking of bright lights, we're now on to location number 4. Location number 4 is this hallway that we're in, this weird kind of industrial CO2 tank hallway thing. So this location, again, if you look at the background, really bright white walls. This makes it really, really easy for us to take a fixture in there and to light it. So for this, we took a 2x1 Gemini and we blasted it against the opposing wall, and you can kind of catch it in the tip of the sunglasses, or in his glasses there. We take that 2x1 Gemini and we simply blast it against the opposite wall, using that wall as an increased surface area. So if we come here, right, here's the hallway that we're filming in. Here it's pretty narrow, right? But we're picking kind of which side we want this to be on. And if our talent is going to be kind of over here, facing camera this way, what I would do is I would take my 2x1 Gemini, I'd place it here, and I would blast light against this wall. I may rotate it depending on the exact shot that we're getting, but the more that I rotate it, the more uneven the spread of light is going to be against that wall. So primarily I'm going to keep it straight against the wall, and I'm just going to move it up and down depending on where I need it to be for a given shot. Same with if I move my subject to the other side, I simply flip this around so then that way it's blasting against that wall. Again, the purpose of that is to create a very inconspicuous lighting style. I don't often want my lighting to feel sourcey. Sourcey lighting is where you can very quickly and very easily identify what the light is, where the light's coming from, how far the light is away from the subject, right? Which can very quickly pull your audience out of the projects that you're in. So we want to keep things motivated. We want to keep things somewhat ambiguous. And again, soft light is a great way to do that. So we'll look at one example here real quick, or 2 examples rather, of this. So here's the first one here. If I was to film this again, I would probably use a polarizer, so then that way you don't see me here, right? Like there I am standing right there. But you can kind of see right here in the corner, right here, you get a little sneak peek of what that gaffer and the 2x1 Gemini is doing. But when you're looking at the shot kind of in the wide, again, our key is coming from this wall, even though this wall is white and that wall is much, much closer to them, right? If we were just to kind of go into the room and shoot it as is, our natural light that's here would be brighter just due to the proximity of our face to wall. But because we're blasting light against the opposing wall, we're getting all of this light that's coming in from camera right, and that's then what's giving us this really nice separation, kind of a stop and a half between this side of the face and that side of the face, okay? And again, if we go in a little bit closer here, there we go, you can kind of get another kind of sense for what that's doing. Again, even though we have a lot of contrast change between the front of the face and kind of the specular highlights that we're getting there on the cheek, and then kind of how much we fall off just off of the face, it is a slow gradient. It is a slow, gradual fall off. And that's what we're really, really looking for. It's not always about the intensity of the light. It is how we get that light to behave. And if I can take the surface area of a light from a 2x1 and I can blast it against a 30-foot wall, now instead of just having light coming from this much, it's coming from everywhere. And that's going to create that even, soft spread of light. This is also why we use beadboards a lot and bounce boards a lot when we're filming, is that is a very fast way of increasing the surface area of a modifier or of a fixture. So instead of having a fixture pointed directly at your talent, you point the fixture away from your talent into a much larger surface area, like a beadboard, like a bounce board, foam core, any of that kind of stuff, and use this as the surface area to scatter that light across the face, right? Anytime we modify a light, we're either losing the intensity of that light or we're losing the spread of that light, but you're always losing something. If we're going to be bouncing it, it is going to soften the light to get it to behave how we want at the expense of the intensity or the brightness of that light. This is why buying bright lights matter, right? We need to buy bright lights so we can modify them without having to worry about whether or not we're going to have enough light to create those shots. Hello from Mexico. I'm so glad you guys are here. The last setup that I want to look at is the scene that we kind of close the spot out with, and this is the scene that we're shooting outdoors in the woods. The reason why we shot here is because woods and forest and wooded areas have what we would call stippled light, right? It is light that is shining through the forest. So by the time it hits the forest floor, you're getting a lot of bright areas, you're getting a lot of dark areas, and they're very, very uneven due to the leaves and the branches and all of the things that we're shooting through as we get from one end of the light source to the other end, which would be the forest floor. This is where consistency is super, super important, right? So again, with stippled light, as people move through it, there's going to be shaded areas, there's going to be bright areas, it's going to be very, very uneven. In order to make that more even, in order to make that something that we can actually work with, we then need to have lighting that is going to make it so we don't lose all of the character of the stippled lighting, but we can simply even that out. And this is a technique that's used in a lot of movies, and you've probably seen it before, and it's what we would call like a walking light. And generally, you would see this oftentimes with like a fixture inside of a china ball or inside of a lantern, and that would be a mobile light that would then move with our subjects. A couple of key points with that is, of course, it needs to be mobile. So if we look here, you can see that instead of having it in a lantern, I have it in a 3-foot octobox. This is the 1x1 Gemini, and I have somebody walking with our talent. The 1x1 is plenty bright. I can operate it off of battery power, which means that I can then move around with that light without having to have it plugged in anywhere. Throw it on a lollipop right there, which makes it easy to move around. So here you can see here, the light, even with the modifier on it, is light enough that I'm then able to get the light looks that I want out of it, which is then what's going to create kind of this overall look here, which really kind of gives us the emotion and the tone that we're looking for when filming outside without having all of the difficulties of the inconsistency of light. So real quick here, we're just going to kind of break down that fixture real quick. So we have the 1x1, and then I have that in an octobox. This is a 3-foot octobox. And that, of course, then more than triples the surface area of my light fixture. It also changes the shape of that light. The reason we didn't use a lantern for this one is because, of course, we're shooting during the day, so there already is enough light to play with that I don't mind if it's a little bit more directional, because this is acting as a fill. If we were filming at night and we wanted it to still feel like we're out in the woods and we wanted to make our source more ambiguous, throwing it in a lantern or throwing it in a china ball would be a great way of, again, getting more spread of that light to be kind of more 360 than it is kind of right now, which is a little bit more like 120. But for what we're doing, that's what we want. And then the 1x1 is powered off of a battery pack. Again, standard V-mount, gold mount batteries, and then we throw that onto, in this case, a C-stand arm, and then that is able to then be looped into a belt. It's able to just be handheld. It's able to just be used as a stand for when you're not wanting to hold that light. But the 1x1 Gemini is so light that carrying it is easy. So we're able to do our walk and talks, and in this case, just kind of walk and dance, while still keeping a very even and kind of consistent lighting. The other thing that I really liked with the Octobox here on this one, and I'll pull it up here so we can see here, is I really liked the way that it added this glare in the sunglasses. I liked the shape of it. I liked the look of it. It helped kind of bring that the eyes to life, even though, of course, we're not seeing the eyes in these sunglasses. But this is a great example of what stippled light looks like, right? So we can see in the background, right, through the bokeh of the lens, we can see just how uneven all of this light is on both sides, right? There are patches where it's more sunny. There's patches where there are more foliage. So instead of having to compete with that by bringing in our Octobox, you can see here that our key light is coming from the Octobox side, and that then over here, all of this natural light is coming in just being used as a fill. But the brightest source in this shot, even though we're outside, is using this walking light as the key across the face. And you can see it here too, right? So now, of course, we don't have the glare in the reflections here, but we do have this really nice key light that's kind of coming across the face here that we can see in these specular highlights, where the light that's coming in as the fill and the light that's kind of hitting the back of the top of the hat, you can see that we do have this stippling that's already happening where parts of it are darker and parts of it are lighter. So again, here's the wide shot, but I'm still getting that reflection in the eyeballs, right? I'm still seeing that Octobox come through, and I'm pinching in farther than the resolution allows me. But you can see that there, and you can see that our key light is still coming from this side. And then what we're having here is our fill. But look at this. See how the shoulder is so much darker than the kneecap and the cuff of the sleeve there? That's because we're in this stippled lighting. This lighting over here is super, super uneven. And if we just decided to go out into the woods and we're just going to shoot a thing without evening that light out, we're going to be in a world of hurt, because some shots are going to be underexposed, some shots are going to be overexposed, some parts of our talent's face are going to be underexposed, while other parts of the face are going to either be on or over. So when we're filming outdoors, and you can go look at last week's episode because we talked about natural light, consistency, creating a sense of even, consistent lighting when filming outside is always super, super important. Whether it's a walking light like what we had there, or if it's the 2x1 or the 5-foot Octobox that we put in that kind of industrial outdoor area acting as more of a fill. Doesn't matter either way. Consistency is always, always key. John says, is that a cooling fan we see on the back of the fixture behind you? Yes. Is it a low volume or a low noise fan? Are there any light panels fixtures that you can use that may require acoustic considerations? Yes, this is an active fan that's back here. I have never once heard it. Generally, I just leave it on auto and it kicks on when it needs to kick on and kicks off when it needs to kick off. The nice thing ergonomically about this light, and it's true of all of the Gemini fixtures, is that the actual, and I don't know if I can rotate this enough to where you can see it here, but the entire back of the panel itself, I don't think you can catch that in that shot. The entire back of the panel is a heat sink. So even though we do have an active fan to cool the light, the fact that it's actually engineered with a giant heat sink on the back of the entire panel keeps the light cool enough that I have never once heard it. You do have some fan control in the menu settings, so if you wanted to, you can kind of go into your menu settings and adjust that should you need to. So fan settings here, I can have fan on, off, delayed, on at max, DMX controlled. I have all of that should I want to. But that said, I have filmed interviews with librarians and libraries use these as the lights, and I've still never once have heard it. The active noise or the active fan is really nice to have from a cooling standpoint, but it's never been an issue for me. Okay, so I know we blitzed through this, but that's 5 locations, right? So we had the boiler room, kind of industrial interior. We had the blue and red, kind of the neon look interior. We had the outside industrial. We had that hallway with the white walls. And then, of course, we had the forest. So 5 very different setups, 5 very different lighting requirements. Some of them used 1 fixture, some of them used 4. It's not about using the same type of light for everything, right? We don't need 4 fixtures for every single one of those setups. It's using the right light for the right purpose. And the nice thing with these lights is that we can modify these, whether they're on light modifiers or off light modifiers, quite easily and quite quickly. So I can use these much more as utility lights than I would with other LED panels. So that's one of the things that I really, really like about those. So before we then move on to the next one, which I know we are rapidly running out of time, I want to watch that first project again real quick to give you a sense kind of what to look for in the lighting. So here is this real fast.
Hey, you know I want it. I want it all now. Can't live without it. I wouldn't know how. On the way. You know I want it.
So again, if the goal is to create the looks that we want to look without it being obvious, that is the way that we would go about filming. That is the way we'd go about lighting a commercial project like that, which would still give us that stylized look without necessarily having all of the drawbacks of shooting in natural environments or using just the available light. Okay, so there's that. Again, if you want to see that in its true color, follow me on Instagram. I'm going to post it later today. You'll be able to actually see what the colors are supposed to look like. The next one, and we're going to blitz through this quite quickly, is a project piece that we did for Adidas for some of their new shoes, the NMD shoes. We're going to look at just this as a 1 setup piece, but there are a couple of functional pieces that I really like about this that I want to hit, and then we can kind of open it up for Q&A here. So this was a piece that we did for social, and this is a seamless loop. So the idea of this is that there is no beginning or end, that it just kind of continues throughout. So playing with this idea of kind of this retro neon 90s throwback kind of look to it. So we were playing off of the idea of like the DVD screensavers where it kind of bounces around the screen in these really, really bright colors. The setup for this was simple, but was able to do a lot. So the setup here that we used was we put the shoe on a disco ball spinner to get it to kind of get that move that we're looking for on camera. But we were able to put in the Bluetooth dongles, and these are available where you can get them for the 2x1s or the 1x1s, which then gives me color control directly on my phone. So I could sit there and I could program color shifts to happen on camera. So as I'm making these moves and as I'm changing the look and feel of how I want things to happen, I can do that all the way that, you know, it just naturally feels. And the cool part about that is that the background that we filmed on was a white paper sheet. I don't know if there's audio on this one here, but I'll mute it in case there is. But we were filming this on a white paper backdrop. So all of the color that you're seeing come through on this one is all just the Gemini color that's coming in and bouncing off of that light. So from a lighting setup perspective, we had the shoe in the middle, right? So that's kind of our piece here. We put a beadboard underneath it, a 4x8 beadboard underneath it, and that was to then bounce light back up onto the shoe from underneath. So the beadboard is underneath. Above it, again, we had that 3-foot octobox, or no, lantern, I apologize. The 3-foot lantern was above that, again, skirted, so that way we weren't getting too much spill onto our background. And then on our backdrop here, which is that white sheet, I had a 2x1 Gemini underneath. I had a 1x1 Gemini at eye level and a 1x1 Gemini at eye level. And these 3 lights, a low and 2 eye level lights, were able to kind of give me enough variation that I could just plug in different colors of light and it would give me a nice gradient across this background. So we had a 2x1 overhead in the 3-foot lantern. We had a 1x1 here, or here and here, and the 2x1 here, all kind of blasting that light there. I did put barn doors on this low Gemini, so that way, again, kind of controlling spill of what might be coming back up. And then I used a nice big flag over here to block any ambient light from the room from kind of coming onto our shoe. So, single source for that, but gives us that nice top down. And then all of the rest of the move that we did on camera was just the spin that you saw, right? So it's just this rotation that we used with that disco ball spinner, which is like $11 on Amazon. But we were filming this on the red Komodo, which means that we could film it in 6K, even though the final deliverable would only be in 1080, right? It's only standard def, and we were using it in a variety of aspect ratios. So we needed something to be wide, something to be tall, something to be 4x5. And so all of the rest of that move where we're kind of coming in and doing all of the rotation stuff, that's all done keyframing in After Effects. So we programmed the gradients with the phone using the Bluetooth dongles in the lights. I could plug in the exact color that I want. I could have the shoe spin. I would then be able to go through, change the colors as I would need to. That would give me my final plate, drop that into After Effects, and then I can add all of my rotation, all of my zoom in, pull out all of that stuff because we had so much more resolution than we needed in the final. And then you spread on some sprinkly bits and you end up with this. And then, of course, that loops over and over and over. We got other shots for different parts of the campaign because not everything was the looping thing. The looping thing was just my favorite because you could never tell kind of where it started or where it ended. So that was how we did that. I know we, again, blitzed through that, but that, again, we used 4 lights for. We had the top down in the lantern, and then we had the 3 across our white paper backdrop. And that also goes to show just how rich and vibrant the color in the light panels Gemini lights are, because I can film it on white and yet the color is so rich here that like you would never know that that was white paper. Like you would think that that is, you know, some sort of gradient that we did in After Effects, but that was all done practically against a white paper backdrop. Okay, so I know that we blitzed through a ton of content here. We did 5 setups for the first one. We did 1 for that one there. We have just a couple of minutes here before the end of today's episode. I want to open this up to Q&A. If there are things that you guys want to talk about, things that you guys have questions about, whether it's process stuff, whether it's lighting stuff for your own projects, whether it's stuff for that's fixture specific, I want to open this up to you guys. Again, quick reminder, next month's is going to be my favorite thus far, and it is 3 looks, 1 location. So we're taking 1 look, or 1 location rather, and we're lighting it 3 different ways to create 3 different film looks. So then that way you can kind of see how much lighting plays into how a scene actually feels. Daniel, yes, so for the Adidas piece, the camera was locked off on sticks the whole time. We figured out, so with the small HD monitors, you can do different aspect ratio overlays. So we figured out how far away we needed to be to still get enough screen real estate to shoot in 9:16, 16:9, 4:5, and 1:1. Threw those overlays on, backed the camera up to where it needed to be, kept it on sticks, had it spinning, and then just punched record. We had probably about 40 seconds of spinning. I think we had it spin like 6 times. And then that then gave us all of the necessary footage that we needed to do all of the spinning and stuff. There is a tutorial on my YouTube channel for a process that we used for this. It was for a different project, but it was the same idea. So if you want to go check that out, that's on my YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/Garrett Sammons. And then the title of the video is, I think I faked a camera robot was what it is, because we were trying to figure out how you fake the bolt arms. So we used the same techniques from that video for this one, different application, different client for that one, but you'll kind of get the same idea of like how we did it from a camera perspective. But that's how we did it from a lighting perspective. Jeff asks, what device or app was used to control the gradient colors from your phone? Oh, thanks, Simon. There it is. So that's the video if you want to see that. So there is a light panels app that you can get on the phone here. Let me give you the exact name of this here. Yeah, so it is this guy here. There is an app that's on the phone, Smart Director app. There it is. It's a free app. When you plug in the dongle, there's a port in the top here for the dongle that you can just plug it directly in on. You can then hit add device as long as you have the Bluetooth hooked up to that. You punch the button. You can then add device. You can pair them into groups. So I had the 2 1x1s paired into a single group. I had the 2x1 kind of on its separate thing. You can set parameters. You can do a lot of cool stuff in the app there. You obviously don't need that if you're using DMX controls. You obviously have a ton more specificity in your controls if you're using DMX. But for what we were using, because it was a fairly simple setup, we were able to do everything just via Bluetooth. So highly recommend it. The dongle is an accessory, so that is something that you purchase separate from the fixture. And that's true of the DMX modules as well as the Bluetooth modules. So if you want that added functionality of the wireless control, those are dongles that you can add after the fact there. Okay, so quick recap. Buy the brightest, most accurate lights your budget can afford. Accurate light is just as important as bright light. The light panels, Gemini lights, and the Astra lights are all extremely bright and extremely accurate lights. If the RGBWW, if the color control is not as important to you and you just need really bright fixtures for traditional lighting, the Astra line of lights is a great series of lights. So if you don't have the budget for a Gemini, you could probably swing for an Astra, and that's going to be a great way to start building out your kit with a light that's extremely easy to modify, extremely easy to control, and extremely bright to use. I've used these lights for a number of years now, and when I started, I would use my spectrometer and I'd get a color read off of these lights every time that I would go through and I'd do a lighting setup. And I've gotten so comfortable with these lights and I trust their readouts so much that I don't actually need to get a color read on these lights when I use them. What I do use my spectrometer for now is if I'm using these lights paired with another manufacturer's lights, I'll actually use my spectrometer. I'll get a color read off of the other fixture and then match this to that, because I know that what this is telling me is going to be accurate. Okay, so Henrik says, why not incorporate the dongle in the fixture like all competitors do? So Henrik, great question there. I'm sure this is more appropriate for the light panels team, but what I can tell you is that not everybody needs all of the same functionality. Bluetooth is not something that's going to get used in a feature film environment. All of that is going to be DMX control. Having wireless DMX is not something that everybody on the indie solo owner operator side uses. So having using wireless DMX control on a small indie shoot is not something that you would necessarily need. And so to add all of that functionality into a light is going to increase the cost and increase the weight in a way that may not make sense for a lot of filmmakers, because we can customize the exact functionality that you need out of that. Now, it does come with wired DMX in and out. So that is something that you automatically have built into it. But if you want that wireless control, that's something that you can kind of expand the ecosystem out as needed. The other thing is that all of the dongles are universal, so I can use the dongles on any of the Gemini lights. They're not fixture specific. Same is true with the Astras. The Astras have an entire module package, so depending on the functionality that you need out of a fixture, you can then kind of create that with that. But weight and cost, those are the things that, generally speaking, if it's not something that everybody needs, it's not something that everything should have. Some of the competitors really primarily focus on a prosumer level, in which case everybody who's going to be buying those fixtures is probably using Bluetooth, so it makes sense for that. If you're working with fixtures that are exclusively on the professional level, they're not going to have those features, but they're going to have built-in features just for the high-end filmmakers. So having something that's scalable is helpful, depending on where you are in your filmmaking journey, and then, of course, how you grow in that journey. Okay? We are just about out of time. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to DM me on Instagram. That's where, I'm most often online. So if you have questions, comments, concerns, things you guys want to chat about, finding me on Instagram is the easiest way to stay in touch. As always, again, you do need to register for the live streams. So even though all these live streams are free, thanks to Light Panels for that, you do need to make sure that you go on their website to register for that. So next month, 3 looks, 1 location. It's going to be a ton of fun. I'm really, really excited to do that and take you guys along for the journey. Again, if you've missed any of the live streams up to this point, check out their webpage, check out their YouTube channel, subscribe to them, so then that way you can kind of see all of the things that we've covered up to this point, because each episode builds on each other. Okay? I had a wonderful time chatting with you guys. Again, connect with me. I'd love to chat with you guys more. Register for next month. It's going to be a cool one. And as always, thanks to Light Panels for hosting this. I'm having a ball doing it. I hope you guys are having a ball watching it. And I will see you guys all next month. Thanks.